It's time for fun, learning, commentary, laughs, and more. Care of the most diverse group in the genealogy and family history world. Welcome to BlackProGen Live with your hosts, Nika and True, and the baddest panel in these pedigree streets Angela, James, Linda, Alex, Ellen, Tony, Shelly, Teresa, Bernice, Felicia, Willie, Renata, and Tasia. It's BlackProGen Live, genealogy, family history research with flavor.
Hello and good evening, everyone. Hey, welcome back to Black Pro Gen Live. It's Tuesday night, and we just want to thank you and welcome you for coming on out. My name is True Lewis, and I'm going to be your co-host for the evening. And we've got a lot planned in store for you that Nika has planned and with the other panelists. And we just want to say hello and thank you. So with that, I'm going to turn this mic over to your host and our girl, Nika Smith.
Hello, True Lewis. Have you forgotten? I'm so glad you haven't forgotten my name.
If only I don't holler it once a day.
For good reason, I hope. I know
Yes.
it's been quite a while since we have been with you guys. You know, work and duty calls, but that does not mean that Black Progen is over and that we have forgotten about you. So thanks so much for joining us this evening. We are glad that you are here, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about tonight. The topic of the evening. Play aunts and uncles, folks your grandmother was close to, but you don't know if they're related or not. The business who everyone seemed to deal with. Researching the friends, associates, and neighbors in your family can be key in moving your research further. Thanks for tuning into the who's and the whens, identifying friends, associates, and neighbors. Here are your neighborhood reminders for the evening. Don't forget to join the conversation. If you have a question, comment, or you just want to opine about something we're talking about, participate in the live chat on YouTube to the top right hand of the screen if you're watching on a computer, and at the bottom of the YouTube app on your mobile device. Also, feel free to weigh in on Twitter by tweeting us at BlackProGen or use the hashtag BlackProGen. Also, don't forget to set reminders for our upcoming shows. All you need to do is head to my YouTube channel and click set reminder under the episodes you're interested in the live streams area, or simply subscribe to the channel and you'll get a reminder each and every time we go live. And we know you all are using these icons. In fact, I was on We're Related Today and I saw them all over the place for some of my Facebook friends, which is great. So if you are like us and you're tired of seeing Confederate flags, ships, flowers, and the wrong oil paintings for your ancestors, here we are to save the day. Download our new icons for online tree profiles today, and we're adding new ones all the time. So if we miss something, be sure to let us know. All right, we're all coming off mute. Hey, y'all. It's a little tiny little panel tonight. That's all right. Like my little tomatoes. FYI, I had to give an update. I did harvest some tomatoes today, and they were amazing. I don't know who prayed, but we've gotten a ridiculous amount of rain in Tennessee over like the last 4 days. So I actually had to go and get mine off the vine that were starting to turn, because otherwise, if you have too much water, they start to burst. So I didn't want all of mine to burst, but it was great. Pink and orange tomatoes galore. So if Neff Hawthorne is out there, yes to the Epsom salts. It worked. All right, so let's go to our furthest. Well, actually, we have two people in Florida tonight. Let's go with the lady in red, Ellen Fernandez-Sacco.
Hey, Ellen Fernandez-Sacco. It's great to be here tonight. I can't believe summer's over, but here we are.
Our other lady in Florida, I think she's in Florida. Looks like her
Mhm.
Florida place.
Yeah.
Tony Carrier.
Hello, friends. Tony Carrier from the Center for Family History at the International African American Museum in Charleston, but I'm in Tampa at my home tonight.
Yes, she has. I was gonna say the Florida ladies have had some weather. It's been a time in the land weather-wise for them, so we're glad that they're good. All right, going up north a little bit to Ms. Renata Yarborough Sanders.
Hello, everybody. It's Renata Yarborough Sanders from here in Hampton Roads, Virginia, from Into the Light blog, and glad to be here with you tonight. I've been MIA for the last couple of shows, other than in the chat room. So good to see everybody, or
Yeah,
let you
but
see me.
but you had a wedding and some other stuff that was going on. So you were living the life. You had there was a beach. There was all kinds of stuff going on with you
Yeah, a
between
little bit of something.
yeah, between you and Bernice and her whirlwind trip through Cote d'Ivoire this last week. I don't know if you all are friends with Bernice Bennett, but she
Mhm.
she literally took us on the whole journey
Yes,
with
she
her and the
did.
crew to Cote d'Ivoire. Matter of fact, I'll bring that up now. Tune in. Her show, Research at the National Archives and Beyond, is returning this Thursday, the 27th, and she'll actually be interviewing the organizer of that trip, Adanago Brown. So, who's one of my boos. I love her. That's my baby. Went to Benin with her. Went to Cameroon with her twice. I cannot speak more highly of the trip she puts together. Really cannot. She's just so excellent, and I hope she brought some fabric back for me. All right. Not last but least, my favorite, about looking like you are straight up from California with your button-up shirt to your neck and your cornrow, giving New Orleans all the throwing up the W flavor is our baby Willie Russell.
Hey everybody, Willie Russell calling in from New Orleans.
You cannot tell me you don't look like you are straight up from LA right now. Even though you're from Oakland, you are giving me all the like late 80s, early 90s Dr. Dre and Snoop
Yes,
vibe right now.
I bet he got the kicks on too.
That's what I'm about to say. Are you wearing some chucks? Because if you are, I'm done.
Not currently. I got carpet though. I know she's on my car.
Why did I know his entire outfit though? That is horrible. Oh Lord, how is it going? How's it going?
know.
Oh, it's going pretty good, except for the weather today. It was a sunny day, and all of a sudden it started raining, so I got wet. But other than that, doing all right.
So clearly, we need to get the child an umbrella. Oh my gosh. And true, there you are in lovely effervescent blue tonight, looking just all homey and
Girl, I just had to get one more last drop of summer in. This is a summer outfit, and it's actually a dress that's supposed to go over your bathing suit, but I'm walking around the house with it on. It's so comfortable. But oh my goodness, all this rain and electricity going out, internet just bungling. But I've been hanging in there. I've been missing you all and everybody out in that audience. I'm just so excited to see everybody. Why do I act like I'm just like haven't seen y'all in years?
because it feels that way. Because it's been like more than a month since we had the last show. Let's see. Margaret Jackson is in the house. Andrea Adams, Ebony Barney, Tom Reed, who let me tell y'all how much hood Tom Reed has. Tom Reed made sure he was watching, or he was in the chat room before the show started. He went through the drive-through, went home, delivered the food to the family, and then hopped on his computer. And then we have Lord, he's down for the cause. Patriva Mack is also in Tampa, so you guys send her a wave, you Floridians.
Hey.
Ebony Barney says she has a glass of wine, her laptop, and several tabs open, so she is primed and prepared for BlackProGen Live tonight. Hello, Phyllis Hunt. May BW, you are in the house. Our girl from Maggie, that's my boo, Casey Mays. We love you. Thanks so much for joining us. Our other boo, Denise Muhammad, she always joins us. Clarice Mason. Shelly Murphy is in the chat room along with Angela Walton Raji, panelist extraordinaire, our friend Carmen White, Phyllis Hunt, Tyrone Craft, Wanda Looney, Joyce McClendon, And then look at you guys. I'm doing romper room. I see you, Jenna Jones. Hey, Cystography is in the house. FYI, if you've never heard of Cystography, they are a group of Black women photographers. They are just celebrated their anniversary. They do exhibits all over the country. Jenna Jones, I think she still is their president, and that is one of my sis talks who is into family history too. Lisa Gorell from California, Genealogical Society. That's my cousin. Raymond Reeves. Gosh, this is a full chat room. I'm just going through all the stuff. You guys are just flying by. I'm so glad to see you. I have to give a small shout out. Today it would be the 79th birthday of my cousin Alice Thompson. Miss her dearly. She was in the Freedom Rides and was beaten horribly by a mob of people in Macomb, Mississippi. It'll be 60 plus years actually in a couple months in November. And I just have to shout her out because, talking about friends, associates, and neighbors, Alice was the person who always remembered those people. She may not be able to give you all the relatives' names or ancestors' names, but she could run down those folks. In fact, she told me her math teacher used to opine about her grandfather and how wonderful of a man he was, and it made her wonder why. We won't answer that question. Grandpa Bay was kind of out there, but but it goes without saying, many of the conversations that I had with Alice were about friends, associates, and neighbors, and the people who connect. And she would always say, I think they're tied to us some kind of way, but I'm not sure. And I think you all probably have somebody in your family that remembers all the friends, associates, and neighbors. So let's go and jump right in. FYI, Raymond Reeves, Alice is your cousin as well. If you Google her name, you'll find out about all the stuff she did. She was literally like 5 feet tall and was way more brave than I will ever be. So just want to send a shout out to heaven to my cousin Alice because I miss her dearly. All right. First question of the evening. When was the first time you noticed the importance of the who's, what's, and where's in your research?
Well, there's one thing I use it for that's my go-to standby, and that is if I can find someone in the census, but I know they were right there in that same neighborhood the whole time, I look for their neighbor's name in the census so that if their name is misindexed, they couldn't have gotten everybody on that street wrong in indexing the records. So if I know good and well they didn't move, I start looking for the neighbors.
Yes, ma'am. That's my go-to strategy, especially with a name that could be butchered, which is any name that could be butchered, right?
Yes.
And that's the thing, because I think especially with how linear online research is, right? It kind of forces you into direct line research, because if you keep accepting hints, right, on the various lines of the family, you can keep adding people, but if you're really only interested in going back further on your line, you won't flesh out the collateral relatives in your family. So a lot of folks just don't early on, they just don't get that. When is the first time the rest of you noticed the importance of the additional people and the additional things outside of your direct lines?
I think I noticed it very early on, or I knew about it, or someone taught me early on to look at the neighbors and the F.A.N club, as we call it. But what I'm finding even now is that things that I did 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and I didn't know about some of the people who were important in the lives of my ancestors. So I'm going back now and looking at census records and marriage documents and all kinds of things that I've had for a couple of decades. And I'm like, oh, look at what their last name was, or, oh, I know that person, that was cousin so-and-so. So, I can't really pinpoint when I knew, but I can tell you that going back and revisiting old research allows you to kind of notice them now, notice them later.
Willie?
Yeah, pretty much the same thing as what she was saying. When I noticed it is when I would see like similar names throughout the census, and I would have to go back. It was like, okay, they have the same neighbor this year, and they have it 10 years later, and then they have it 10 years later. So then what I would do is I'd research the neighbor. And in one particular case, there was a family that lived right next door to my 4th grade grandmother. and it was the same guy who kept living there with his wife. And so I researched his family, come to find out that my great grandfather married his granddaughter. So that's one way I found out that's the best way another way to trace your family back.
Ellen?
It's a lot of, and just touching on what everybody else is saying, it's building up that layer of context, you know. It's like the things we may have picked up, like Renata was saying 15 years ago, or well, what was mentioned about just understanding the networks, it really becomes a lot more, makes a lot more sense when you're able to like look at a census sheet and say like, oh, I can tell like the entire neighborhood is artisans, or they do all people who are workers, or they're all office workers, or it just gives you a flavor for what's going on in that block. So yeah, reviewing the information is really important, and then extrapolating from that. I think it's also harder when people move. You know, after the migration happens, then it's almost starting all over again, and then having to pick people's brains to try to figure out, well, who went and who stayed. But you still had some of that. You still had a lot of chunks of familial relationships that then get transplanted to other locations. So I just really aware of that early, but as a strategy to work with, that's something that built out over time.
Yeah, I would say definitely when you talk about the Great Migration, you know, we've talked about that at length on this show, and the fact that a lot of those communities were then, you know, replicated in California, or, you know, whatever state people ended up in. And so it is a challenge, but then you might start seeing, I mean, because people, you know, at least I can say in my family's experience, you know, and I think a lot of other families' experience, you had that one person that left, went up there, established, set up shop. You know, my family was at 3780 South Ellis. The fact that I never lived in Chicago, but I still know that address because that's where my great uncle went. The great great aunts went. My grandmother lived there. My mom told me about it. Them sharing one bathroom for everybody on the hall, and you know, and my mother talks addresses.
Yeah.
So, you know, so when she doesn't say so and so's house, she says their address. I don't know if anybody else's parents do that, but my mom did that. So as a child, when I would see people in census, I would know, oh, or you know, you're older researching, I would know that those are the right people because the address my mother gave me.
Right.
So I would say, yeah, everything you all have said is absolutely 110% right. Next question I have is, what benefits can you get from researching the friends, associates, and neighbors of your family? Besides the obvious that Tony talked about, which is, well, you could find them on the census if you could, you know, you thought you had lost them. What are some of the other benefits?
Some of those people turn out to be family later on. Like we were looking at Michelle Obama's family, and they moved with a group of families to Chicago. But when we started looking at those families, they weren't all that connected back in Georgetown before they moved. But once they moved, they were all working in the same industry, like Ellen mentioned, that they all worked in the shoe industry. They were shoemakers, they were boot blacks, et cetera, shoe repair. And they ended up intermarrying because they went up together all in the same neighborhood. And now those people are all family. So some of those friends and neighbors that you're seeing, witnessing documents and things like that, they actually could be family members.
It can also help you to see patterns in the community. You know, for instance, I have ancestors that left Warren County, North Carolina, and moved to Norfolk, Virginia. But I have found out over the years, I always just thought it was my family, but that was actually a migration that occurred for lots of people from Warren County, North Carolina. And it was, as Ellen was saying, industry based because of the coal piers in Norfolk and the shipyards in the area. So you can just kind of get a feel for what might have been happening in the community. I also wanted to just say one quick thing about the previous question when Nika was talking about addresses. One thing I do is I plot my ancestors' addresses on Google Maps, and then you can look at the proximity of your family members or groups of family members. And you can also put those friends, associates, and neighbors on there and kind of look at, where everyone was in relation to each other physically. And that can be very helpful, especially if you're a visual person.
Mm-hmm.
What other benefits have you all seen for this particular type of research?
It can help you find a former slaveholder in some cases. For instance, if you see your ancestor purchasing land from someone who was a landholder and was a slaveholder before emancipation, sometimes that can turn out to be the final slaveholder.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people are also looking at issues around illness in families and trying to figure out what factors might be playing into that, whether it's actually a family thing or an industry thing. So that's just something that I'm starting to see people asking more and more questions about, that's tied to, this issue of friends, associates, and neighbors. Mm-hmm.
Something that I think one of the commenters in the chat room brought up something, and I think this is something that's important too. We also have to look into how events helped shape the fan club, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we're talking about the census and things like that. Of course, weddings, right? Because you're talking about witnesses, things like that. But take for instance, in West Helena, Arkansas, where, you had this huge incident that took place in Phillips County, where, it was basically men that came back from the war were murdered, right? Big, huge riot breaks out, right? You have to imagine a number of people fled that area
Mm-hmm.
for their own safety.
Mm-hmm.
So the fan club, you know what I mean? I don't know if any of us are thinking along those lines of, have you looked into the major events that took place in your ancestral locations, and can you tie those to the fan club, right? Or the people that moved in next to them when they moved to Chicago after that happened, or major disasters like the flood of 1927.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Why is your family, in New Orleans? Okay. And then all of a sudden they're in St. James Parish in 1920, but in 1930, they're in New Orleans.
I have seen examples of that with hurricanes in Puerto Rico in 1920. There was a big hurricane and about that date. But I knew someone who actually lived through it, and he said all it was left was just the stairs at the front of the house. There was nothing left. And from that time, the entire neighborhood had moved into the main part of the town. But then, you wouldn't have known that because it happened when he was a kid. So it's just an example of also, you'll find the same group of people, but sometimes it's really far away and sometimes it's really not far, but it kind of gives you an explanation for what happened for the movement. Yeah.
I was just thinking about my great-grandfather, Calvin, who was formerly enslaved. And there's not a lot of information about him specifically out there, but I guess you would count these as associates. He's on some documents with some rather more well-known people from the community who were heads of schools or pastors or both. And it kind of gives me a sense of who his colleagues were, even though he wasn't the top person or the one that everybody was, writing about, the newspaper articles were about. I knew that these were, this was his cohort. And so that gives me a sense of him. Maybe he's more of a worker bee than the star of the show, which is kind of how I am. And, so that's another way that it can be helpful, just to give you a sense of what your ancestors may have been involved in or who they may have been involved in.
I agree. So there's a lot of things that come into play with this, right? So we're talking about friends, associates, and neighbors. Associates are not just your next door neighbor who may or may not be related to you. That could be a business owner, right? Someone that does business with people, especially we're talking about people of color communities, right? So, before integration, right, you had a subset of the Black community that was the doctor, that was the undertaker, that was, maybe the bank, whatever it is, because you didn't have access to institutions that white people had access to, especially if you were in the South. There were, of course, exceptions to these things, right? I know where my family was from a pension file, ironically. I was able to track who the undertakers were because they went to the undertaker and asked him about whether or not he had handled the funeral of the pensioner. And he talked about his history of working. I came to this parish on this date. He said he had been there for 40 years. Do the math. Okay. And then I started looking at all the death certificates of my family, and everybody went to this man. And then I've thought of a conversation I had with one of my cousins who told me about how the Black community did not like using this man because he owned a furniture store, and he would have the Black services in the back of the store. So people would be coming into the store to buy furniture, and you'd be in there weeping and wailing over your dearly departed.
Oh, no.
And they felt so disrespected by that. So they put
Wow.
their money together and they sent Nookie House. That's this man's name for real. His name is Nookie House. This is in Lake Providence, Willie. So you better be taking notes about this because your family's from there too. And Timothy told me they put their money together and they sent Nookie House to Fisk. Well, Nookie got up to Nashville and he partied and drank all that money away. So they had to put money together again. And that's when they sent Mr. Branham. And Mr. Branham then opened a funeral home. It was called Majestic Funeral Home. And the Majestic Funeral Home became Branham Funeral Home, which is still in operation today. And so just from that one piece, from the pension file, then getting the oral history, you can then start to piece together, okay, all of these people in the family use the same mortuary. You can do the same thing with cemeteries.
Mm-hmm.
That's literally a town recreated with dead people in the ground.
Yes.
Right? We shouldn't look at Find a Grave as an online cemetery. No, that's nothing but a big old universal town. Right? It's a world location. And that's really what it is, right? So where do you get your breadcrumbs or your clues to identify the who's, the what's, and the where's?
The Black newspapers are really great for they would tell who went to whose birthday party, or who had people over to their house for a club meeting, and you get the names of the friends, the club members, I found my mother as a 3-year-old flower girl in a wedding in the Norfolk Journal and Guide, something I would never have known about. So, that attached her to another family that I'd never heard of. So the newspapers can be great. The Black newspapers can be great. I guess all of the newspapers can be great, but those Black ones are really good for us.
Yeah, because the thing is, even if it was a white newspaper, sometimes they would have the colored news section. Yeah, and it would depend on the paper. Like I know where my family was from, it was only 3-page paper. It came out once a week, and the colored news was on the 3rd page at the bottom.
Yes.
It's like we had to make sure you knew you were still segregated, and beneath us, we're gonna put you on the back page at the bottom. That's basically what it was. Horrible. But you could always, and it would just be stuff like Negro stabbed to death. And you'd be like, oh my Lord. And that's the only Black news we're going to hear about this week. That's what
I find that in a lot of the majority newspapers, they didn't always use the names. They would say, colored man or Negro man or whatever. Sometimes they did use the names, but sometimes they didn't. But in those Black newspapers, you get full details about everything and everybody.
Child, yes. And if you're looking national papers, do not neglect the Baltimore Afro-American, Chicago Defender, which my mama calls it the precursor to the National Enquirer for Black people. She can say that though, because she's from Chicago. So if there was any scandal cracking off, the Defender is gonna have it. It doesn't matter, nationally speaking. And they also took, things like my uncle's grandmother would send in the reports from the baptisms in Lake Providence. I thought that was the most random thing. She would say, Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church baptized 10 into the name of the Lord. And I just had to read it like Miss Rebecca would read it. What are some other easy ways to find breadcrumbs or clues to identify the who's, the what's, and the where's? We talked about pension files, which we have an entire episode on that. So there's no need for us to go into that ad nauseum. Go back into the vault of BlackProGen Live because we are on episode 68 and we have talked about that, right? right? So pension files are great. We talked about newspapers. I think we have that slotted for next year. We need a whole show on that.
Yes.
What other things? We talked about the census, right? Tony brought that up earlier, looking at the neighbors. And here's the thing. Don't just look on the same page.
Right.
Because some of these people, yes, it could be they could literally think about it. You didn't move. This is your house. But the census taker in 1900 went in this direction. The census taker in 1910 went in this direction. So that doesn't necessarily mean that the person moved, because your house has been here, your hogs, your cows, your horses, your grove of trees, where you paid your poll tax and you still couldn't vote, that's still the same place. But if the enumerator went different directions, if you weren't home that day and they had to come back, right? These are all things you need to factor in. So don't just say, oh, well, they live near. Well, they could have lived next door. We don't know. We weren't there when Mr. Michelin, whoever was, went through and obliterated everybody's names in 1870. We still have it, but that's something to keep in mind. So when I say neighbors, for me, I'm thinking that ward, that beat, that municipality. Those are neighbors to me.
So
I just wanted to make a point about that when you were saying about the census and our neighbors and associates. Back in the early days, I hate to bring this up, but I was a real big fan of Tony Burrows, and I was always about that Nettie Rule that he always talked about. And this is what you're explaining to me. And I know that we use a different terminology for it, but it's still the Nettie Rule, where you do those 10 pages or those 10 people forward, the 10 people backwards. So
I wanted to mention funeral programs, obituaries,
Obituaries.
and wedding
Wedding
programs.
notices.
Especially wedding programs, or notice if you can find out who the bridesmaids and the groomsmen were and all of that, you're opening up new doors, new connections who may or may not be family.
I agree. And child, yes, people think, oh, well, they were just a witness. That person did just roll up on the street and say, I'll be a witness for your wedding. Because you got to remember, people had to put down quite a bit of money back in the day. Like, it's not like it is now. Like granted, depending on where you are, $80 is a lot of money. No, not like the bonds that people used to have to pay back in the day, or the security that they had to provide in order for folks to get married. So no, they weren't just choosing just anybody for that.
Yeah.
And so that is perfect. Funeral programs. I'm the granddaughter of a funeral program hoarder. That's how I knew I made it as a genealogist. When she gave me her collection, I knew I had made it, because I knew my grandmother was so maniacal about funeral programs. So my mother had been gone from Chicago for 30 years. And every month, I felt like my grandma used to stake out funerals for people she didn't even know. We would get a stack this thick. And I'd be like, oh, and I already knew what it was because of the shape.
The lady from Good Times.
And she would give it to my mom, and I'd be like, how does Granny know all these people?
Yeah.
And so those programs are gold. If you have them, seriously. In fact, I almost feel like if you're using a genealogy database, you need to be sourcing those programs. The pallbearers, those people, think about now, you aren't just going to go to the grocery store and say, you know what, can you carry my daddy's casket to the cemetery for me? I mean, that sounds preposterous, but we don't think about it like that as genealogists. You're not going to just ask somebody to carry a casket or sing, his eyes on the sparrow at a service, and you don't know them, right? Or you haven't heard them. So these are deliberate decisions that were made by our people.
I'm building a whole profile off of my uncle's 1946 obituary, because we know nothing about him, but there's so much in that obituary that says about him. It's like you gotta research every person, even down to Reverend Good Game. I mean, the funeral home. I'm like, that's how I'm going about that obituary, just to put his life together. Because who are all these prominent people going? But that's just Daddy's brother, Yeah. So.
Yes. Carmen White says that she's a certified funeral program archival.
Yes.
So clearly we need to offer some sort of archival system or certification for these
And
particular
we done
people.
took it over now.
Yeah, because I mean, those are, I will always remember this. So the first genealogy program I did with young people,
Mhm.
we had a young man that lived with his grandmother. And I kept telling him, you are the jackpot. Like, you're there with your grandma. Like, she's 2 generations older than you. And Michael would always say, I am not asking her nothing because every time I do, she just clams up on me. And no, I'm not asking her. And I was like, Michael, come on. So literally like 5 sessions in, this is with me meeting with them weekly. He said, Miss Nika, I said, what? Look at this. He comes in with a stack of obituaries this high.
Oh my goodness, that's just
And
a
I
lot.
said, where did you get that? And he said, my grandma. And he said, and she wouldn't stop talking. And I said, baby, I said, she was waiting for somebody to come and ask her. She had to know that you were serious. And he had like 5 generations worth of information in these programs that were in the attic.
Mm.
And so,
Wow.
yes. So that's the thing. Going back to what Renata said earlier, you have so many clues that are hiding in documents you have already looked at, or you claimed you looked at them, right? We all have them. Nobody is absolved from this. None of us
No,
are.
nobody. And I
No.
tell you, a lot of stuff I got too was from church histories, like Mount Coney. Granddaddy Ike, the church that he built in 1865. They've been doing a church history every anniversary. That church is like over 130 something years old now. So I learned a lot about the friends, associate, neighbors, and members and family members off those church histories that Leela Joe sends me, or I got from Miss what's her name? That's the church secretary now. So I keep in touch with her because she knows everybody. She knows when I need to go and get a new photo of somebody in the cemetery.
Well, and that's something that we also can bring into current, right? So maybe you aren't
Mhm.
getting the programs, but do you subscribe to the local paper where your family is from?
Yes, the Union Springs Herald since
I do too, but
1865.
here's the thing, right? You
Yeah,
could be getting
yeah.
those paid because a lot of these little small town newspapers don't have websites and they don't have online access to their
Once a
paper.
week.
Another thing you need to look at is if the mortuaries are online, subscribe to their updates so that when a new service happens, you're getting an email. And then that way you can go in, oh, here's the service, and then troll the people who are writing on the wall, lighting the candle,
Yeah.
leaving
Poe,
flowers, right?
Poe Funeral Home.
What you said, Branham Funeral Home. Thank you for the updates. But that's a way to bring it into current, right? So as you're going and seeking the older stuff, you're still getting new things. So
Mhm.
yeah, we could do a whole show on funeral program. Actually, we have a show all about death this year. So we'll be talking about death, the Grim Reaper. At some, I know it's in November. We'll be talking about that. But funeral programs, we talked about that. We talked about newspapers. We talked about marriage licenses, right? Those
Marriage programs too.
and marriage programs, right? I made a
Mhm.
little fan at
I
my
still
wedding because
have
I knew it was
mine.
hot. And on the back, on the front, it was a duplicate of the invitation.
Yay.
And the back, it had the names of the bridesmaids. Look at her getting her daughters because she uses the fan. She got her daughter's program. I already know she does. And on the back, it had the names of the bridesmaids and the groomsmen. And I also noted who had died out of our grandparents. See, look, there's
Yeah,
Renata's got her.
I got the old 8x10 folded in half.
Yeah, see there, she's got hers right there for her
Yay.
daughter.
So
Yeah.
she did not want to have a program. For those who don't know, my daughter got married in Mexico in July. She did not do a lot traditionally, and we fought over this, and I was adamant. I was like, your mother is a genealogist, you're going to have a program, I will make it. So I made this is not, she didn't do this, it doesn't match anything really that she did, but I was determined that the names of these bridesmaids and groomsmen and my little granddaughter, who was the honorary flower girl, were going to be in here, and there was going to be a written record of this ceremony because she did all her invitations and everything were online. So there's no hard copy invitation to be passed down for this wedding. And I was very upset about that. Leave something that can be passed down people. Okay, so yes, this is what we have left over from her funeral. I mean, oh Jesus, no, her
Blood of Jesus, blood of
marriage.
Jesus.
Black Jesus.
Oh Lord
I'm playing the
Jesus.
blood of Jesus. No, we rebuke that in Jesus' name tonight, Lord. Yeah, but no, but seriously, think about that, right? A lot of people are that's what their options are, right? And the other thing is you also look for friends, associates, and neighbors in the guest book at the funeral. Right? We all know, the Black funeral home when they do the wake before the service and they got that book plopped on out on that on the what is that? It's like a lectern, what the pastor would use.
Yes.
And you got to write your name and your address in that white book. They got one at the funeral, and they got one and then that's how you know it's a funeral, is because they give it to you in the box. When you take the body
Yes.
home, you get it in that nice box. You get the pen sometimes. They'll throw the extra obituaries in there. But a wedding, you have a guest book. We did not actually have one. I put our engagement pictures inside of a mat on a canvas, and people signed the canvas. That is still a guest book. People looking at it can see people signing auntie whoever, or I love you, sister, blah blah blah. Now granted, we use those terms of endearment now, and the person may not be my sister. Right? But they'll know it's somebody that's close. So guest books is another source. We talked about newspapers, death certificates, the informant, right?
Yes.
Or here's another, places where they die. Is that their home? Right? Was it a Black hospital? Do you know that?
Right, yeah.
Did someone work there? Right? Causes of death. If somebody died in an accident, have you looked at the newspaper attached to the death to see if there was a notation of that in the paper? Who were the witnesses of that? Right? These are all breadcrumbs that you can get to friends, associates, and neighbors. Any other things you all can think of? Because I've got some examples that I want to show that actually, ironically, Tony brought it up when she first started talking about how you can use this to get back to a slaveholder.
The only other thing I can think about is like court cases. Often in court cases, you have witnesses that come in that can give you some clues.
Deed records. We talked about land, right? Who served as a witness, who signed, right? Labor contracts, same thing. You're also talking about mortgages or sharecropping contracts. Who was willing to stand in as security for you? Because that was money. That was like me co-signing on a loan for a car for Willie. Do I know that Willie pays his bills on time? Are they gonna call me when he doesn't pay his payment on time? I mean, come on, you guys, right? I'm not just gonna choose somebody out willy-nilly unless I know that they are gonna live up to their edge of their end of the bargain.
Right.
And then in terms of the where. Go ahead, Willie.
I was saying I don't know if this would be necessarily one. What about school records? I don't know if that would necessarily fit, because that was the only way I could find my grandfather's aunt, was only on a school record. For some reason, she was not enrolled on any of the census records, and that was the only way I found her, was through a school record.
That's
Carmen from the chat mentioned a good one too. Coroner's reports.
Yes.
People that get interviewed. Yes.
Agree. And something I would say is a hint that a autopsy was done. They will say so on the death certificate.
Right. Yes.
I know in the state of Illinois, there were actually 2 different certificates issued. If you had a coroner's inquest done or autopsy, it will say coroner's death certificate. If it's just a regular death certificate, it'll say death certificate. Every state is not like that, but I know in Illinois it is. Don't ask me why, but I don't know why, but that's just what it is. I agree. Our Carmen is right. Depending on the location, though, like there's an actual coroner's inquest book where my family is from, and it predates death certificates. And they didn't really give much information other than, the cause of death, and that's it. You know what I mean? But you could look at an address or approximate location that could give you some additional clues. Anything else you guys can think of before we move into your example for the evening? And hello, Bernice Bennett, who's now joining us in the chat room.
Oh,
I
Bernice.
was just thinking about elder care in the past, and that you find them in room rentals. It's not like they were necessarily institutions. I mean, I'm thinking about Puerto Rican census records, but I found elders in different spots that you may not expect because they didn't really have the resources. And also people did that in New York too. Room rental was big in the 40s and stuff. So just one thing.
I agree.
Yeah.
And remember, domiciled member families that migrated usually went together. So,
Right.
City directories, that's another thing too, right? People often forget, especially in a major metro area, they have the book is organized in a few different ways. It's alphabetical. Then you have the cross street section where it'll say at the corner of 8th and Saco. I'm just using it as an example, right? And then they have all those people that are listed there. If you have a relative whose address is listed as 2117 and a half,
Right.
who lived at the hole, right? These are all great questions, right? How did they get into the hole address?
Froze.
And her husband, and one of them lived on one level and the other of them lived on the other, and then they rented out the basement. 6131 South Racine. So that's something else to consider. So even though Auntie and Uncle James were not directly related to me, they were related to my great aunt. So and Auntie lived to be 110.
Wow.
She well outlived Uncle King and Aunt Helen. But if I went and looked at deed records, I would then see their names, right? And she's still a breadcrumb. So that's something else to keep in mind. Anything else before we move on to an example? All right, you guys are quiet. Chat room is flying. Somebody is saying, "Look at God." I don't know what True did, but Carmen is clearly praising God right now for something.
Black Jesus, yes, because we had to
Yeah.
give
Oh,
her
she's.
a hint there.
Oh, colleges are great. Yeah. Oh, matter of fact, since we're talking about colleges, that is the next episode. So don't go too far into the deep end, Carmen, because your wig will be across the room after we're done talking about schools, colleges, and universities in the next episode. All right, let me go ahead and move on to my prime example of the evening. All right, so you're looking at this going, okay, it's a marriage index, right? The average person is going to stop here. That sounds preposterous, but this happens every single day. You're looking at a compiled marriage index for a groom named Nat Collins and a woman named Millie Jordan, married July 5th, 1871 in Concordia Parish, Louisiana. Now, the average person will just save this to their tree and that's it. But if you have gotten married at any point in time in your life, or if you've worked with actual marriage records, you know that this is skimming the surface in terms of the information that you can get. So this is the reason why we have to dig deeper. Millie's now Collins. They live in Concordia Parish, Louisiana. Awesome, right? This is great. But if we go further and we actually pull the marriage license, we're going to get, of course, the information we just got, which is Nat Collins, resident of Concordia, right? We didn't get that on that index. We did not know that he was a resident there, right? He could have been a resident of some other place. We notice it has left blank that Millie's a resident of Concordia Parish. Also notice that they spelled in the index, they spelled it Jorden, and here it looks like Jerdon, right? Just a minor formality. But here's the most important stuff that's at the bottom. And I've got it in boxes. You see, by virtue of the above license, I, A. Tolliver, proceeded at grand cutoff, or that's G cutoff, in the said parish and joined together in the holy bonds of matrimony, Millie and Nat, and that they did it in the presence of Jefferson Finch, Sam Only, and Julius Monroe. Those are three names that we didn't get from that index.
Mhm.
So when you stop at the index and you don't take the next step to get the actual certificate, you don't get any of these information and you don't get your breadcrumbs for your friends, associates, and neighbors. And so we've got this 1871 marriage record. So the next step somebody would say is, okay, well, let's see if we can find them on the 1870 census, because that's a census that would be close to this particular marriage record. Okay, so let's look Concordia Parish, Louisiana. Let's see who is on this census schedule. We've got Alex Tolliver. Remember, the wedding was officiated by an A. Tolliver. We've got Sam Only, who was listed as a witness. And then down there at the bottom is a Nathaniel Collins, age 22. All there on one page. Now, if you noticed, Alex is born in Mississippi and he's about 56 years old. So he's older than that. We didn't get a birth date for Nat on that marriage record either. But now we have context. Okay, he's in the household with his parents. He's born in Mississippi. We see that Sam is listed as an engineer. Interesting occupation at this time. He's born in South Carolina. So we could easily just stop here and say, oh, there's breading, that's breadcrumbs. This is okay. They just live near each other. That's probably why they were on the marriage license together. But we still have to take this a step further. So here we are at 1870. If we, yes, and Willie, you're right, there is another Collins at the top of the page, and that would take us another hour for me to cover him too. But so if we move forward, right? So if we're trying to get back before 1870, this is a brick wall that a lot of people run into, is I can find the people in 1870, but I can't find any other information before that. Okay, so we always talk about the Freedmen's Bureau. So this is when you start to look there. Okay. Go forward 2 years. Here's a labor contract for Grand Cutoff Plantation, which is the same location that Nat got married at, same parish in Louisiana, but this is 2 years earlier. And you'll see Julius Monroe, who was one of the witnesses on that marriage license. You'll see the A. Tolliver, who was the officiant, Alex Tolliver, and you'll see Nat Collins with a little bit of a bit variance of age, but it's the same Nat Collins. Now, here's the key here. This is a labor contract, and there's an owner of the land noted. His name is A.T. Welch. Now, if you do your appropriate research on the slaveholder, that means you're looking for leads for people who died before the war was over. You're looking for probate records, deeds, anything that you can find, right? And there were a number of different ancestors and folks that were in A.T. Welch's family that could have been the slaveholder. A.T. himself did not die before the Civil War because we're looking at his name on a labor contract, right? So that should tell you that we can't look him up. But this is when you have to dig in deep and look into the family of a potential owner. And in this case, we look at his uncle, who is named James L. Trask. We look at his estate inventory in Mississippi. Remember, I mentioned to you that both Alex Tolliver, the officiant, and Nat or Nathaniel were both born in Mississippi. When I looked at the uncle's estate inventory, I find an Alex right there and a Nat. Now, if you were thinking, well, how do you know it's those are names that could be used? If you go back to the 1870 census, Nat is in the same exact household that he is in on this inventory in 1870 than he is in here in this inventory. The inventory and the 1870 match. The inventory and the 1870 census also match for Alex and his wife, Savannah. Right? But of course, if we're good researchers, we're going to vet this more, right? Because we've jumped from Louisiana to Mississippi. How do we know that these are the right people? Well, this is when you go back to our handy dandy mapping episode. If you have not watched that episode and have not taken notes and you don't remember what I mentioned to you about the Geographical Names Information System from the USGS, I'm going to need you to go back and rewatch that episode or get yourselves together, get all of your edges together. Why do I say this? If you go in and look at the geographical name places, there's a spot called and I put it in next to the 1870 census location, it is 6.4 miles between the two. So that lets me know that the labor contract, the 1870 census, and the 1871 marriage license are in the exact, pretty much approximate location. So I'm dealing with the right people. Okay. But still, remember, we went from Louisiana to Mississippi, right? This seems like a big jump. Those are two different states. How do we have the right people? Oh, we're going to go even further. Are we sure it's the right folks? Because remember, on 1870, Alex is born in Mississippi. He's older than Nat. Alex is the officiant. Nathan or Nathaniel is the groom. Alex is born in 1813 in Mississippi. Nathaniel is born between 1847 and 1848 in Mississippi. They're in Wilkinson County. You see where Black Hawk is down there? Look at that little line going straight across. Now, if we're driving today, that's 68 miles because we've got to go back up into Natchez to get there. But if we're talking about old school, you're just going to take a ferry across the Mississippi right there and walk your behind over here to Wilkinson County. That is not that far away.
Wow.
Okay. So remember, we've got the 1871 marriage license where Alex is the officiant, right? We've got an 1870 census where Alex is on the same page as Nat, right? We've got a labor contract where Alex is on the labor contract along with Nat and another witness from the wedding. Okay. Then we found an estate inventory that lists their two names. Okay. Then when you do further research, here's what you discover. Alex is the granduncle of Nathaniel. How do we know this? Because we spent the time doing research, going through indentures or deeds where the slave owning family would mortgage against their slave, and those slaves that were listed as collateral were listed in family groups. And when doing that research, we discover that Nathaniel's grandmother is named Matilda Tolliver. Now, if we operated on surnames alone, we would have completely discounted Alex as even being in the contender of being family members, right? But the majority of the panel is women tonight. You all know this. If we operated on surnames alone, we wouldn't find anything. So in this example, right, we remember that in that 1870 census had Jerry Collins listed as a dad. The inventory had Jerry Collins listed as a dad. Well, Jerry was the nephew of Alex. Okay, so this is why you don't stick with direct line research, is because you would miss this. You'd miss that Alex was the person that was the connection between the two. And if you go back further, like I mentioned, this is several deeds or indentures or mortgages taken out against these people where you see Randall and Esther, who were the parents of Matilda and Alex, and they be listed Randall, Esther, Matilda, Alex. And then the next year, perhaps maybe Matilda's off in her own household and she's now listed as a Collins, or she's just Matilda, but she's with Jerry. Then the next year, you see them with Nathaniel listed. And then by the time you get to the 1870 census, you have him there as a grown man. And we know the next year he's married with his own family. That's why you look for breadcrumbs. Any questions? I saw Tony nodding her head like, really? Yeah. So yeah, that's my point, is this is why you have to research all these people. Because if you don't, I'm telling you guys, with this project that I've been working on, it literally is like a Chinese jump rope. Remember how I used to play Chinese jump rope and you have to go to the next stage and it was a different design? That's what it is, especially when you start getting into these enslaved communities where people start intermarrying a lot. You're going to see overlap in a ton of records for people as witnesses, and all of your breadcrumbs are there. The other piece, and we didn't talk about this tonight, and this is huge. Friends, associates, and neighbors is critical for DNA research. You cannot do DNA research without collateral relatives. It
That
is
ain't gonna
not.
get done.
That's right.
Let me put that in there, right? That you
Yeah.
just, you cannot, because you may have one set of matches that comes from one ancestor and another that comes from another, and if you haven't expanded your tree, we always talk about go up, down, and out. If you just focus on the up and not the down, you can't get to the out. Anything else before we get to viewer comment? I hope everybody's going to be up till 4 in the morning. That's always my hope and my plan, because I'm telling you, I always say every episode that there are millions of slaves hiding on Family Search for free and nobody knows. There are millions of people and clues hiding in documents that people already have,
It's
and they just
always
don't
that
realize
one
it.
person,
Yeah.
like, oh, that's who that was supposed to be for, or that's who that person was. So yeah, you're you're correct about that, especially with DNA, because how are we gonna connect them to your third and your fourth cousins? Those are where those people are coming from at. You can't just do that
Mhm.
up. Go over here.
Well, and even if you have a tremendous amount of endogamy, which a lot of trees that I look at do, it's still helpful to know how that just the tree goes out. You know, even if you can't get like just a precise match, you can at least make some educated guesses as to like where that likely person is among those, all those
Yes.
clusters.
Because
You
one
know.
of my grandmothers, she was listed on her first husband's probate records, but she was, being monitored by my patriot and her father-in-law, but her name was over there on something of his, and he's not really kin to me. Maybe his kids are, because she had two children by him. But that's just an example right there of what I had to submit with my DAR paperwork. Mr. Shover is not kin to me. His two children are, but because I needed my grandmother's name and had to collaborate some documents that she was using that last name, because she married my grandfather very quickly shortly after her husband died. But that one little hidden document, helped me, connect my generations to get into the DAR. But it was on someone that's not even kin to me.
Right. Right.
So I had to know, at least I knew who he was, even though, bloodline, he's not kin to me, but he was, my grandmother's first husband. And that's where her name was. It wasn't on anything that her new husband had. So that's what
Angela does not know what a Chinese jump rope is, and I'm going to send the Wikipedia over.
I didn't know what it was either. I was just piling on.
I remember double
Yes,
dutch.
Angela and I were before you that time or something.
I mean, but when you see it, you'll understand, because there's a couple of ways you could play with it. You could play with it with your hands, or you could actually put it
Oh,
around
putting this
your
oh,
on
you
my
mean
ankle.
Yeah.
And yeah. But
took a
but
picture
there
of
was
her doing
there's
that.
like, there's certain like patterns that you would do with your hand, and the person would have to grab it a certain way. And I mean, that literally
Jacob's
is,
ladder.
yeah, like you to make a
Part of
ladder,
that,
like,
literally,
yeah,
yeah.
that literally is
A
collateral
good.
research. I mean, and F.A.N research. That really is the essence of it, is you've got to take this piece to get to this piece to get to that piece. And she says she never saw one of those,
I'd
unfortunately.
never seen one of those before in my life. And I grew up in Hampton, Virginia.
She said maybe they had one. Apparently had to rent it out at the library or something. I don't know. Maybe the
I
one
have to,
person, maybe the one they had got loaned out and nobody returned it.
that
I
could
I
be.
don't
never
know.
even saw that in PE class. They would bring
I'll
all
have to
kinds of
send you
stuff
a
in
picture
there.
of Puddin'. Pop Pop was teaching her how to do it. So I took photos of that. I'll
Yeah,
have
well,
to send that to Angela.
I'm excited, because I know there everybody in the chat room is like, oh my Lord, I got so much work to do. But really, I think, we should make it a practice. Maybe every September or maybe every October for Family History Month, we go back through those documents that list witnesses and friends, associates, and neighbors, and go back and read, just look at those breadcrumbs. I often talk about my whole situation I had, where it took me 20 years to find the slaveholder. Had I dug deeper into a literally Uncle Andrew selling a horse to DC Jenkins, if I would have vetted that, and I found that early,
No.
That was the slave owner.
But
Yep.
It was right there in front of my face.
yeah, that's context. The context is important. We
It is
finally
so
got the
important.
context. Yeah.
So you have 5 days until the month is over.
Or do it when your research seems to be running dry, like mine is right now. You know,
Yes.
you can't find anything else online. You don't have time to go make a research trip. So just sit down and start going back over old documents, because that's bringing me ripe fruit right now. So
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yes.
In the words of the illustrious group from Philadelphia, let's not wait till the water runs dry. We might watch our whole lives pass us by. Let's not wait till the water runs dry. We'll make the biggest mistake of our lives. Don't do it, baby. Go back over those documents. If you have never heard that song, that is a song by Boys to Men called Water Runs Dry. And we want to keep the reservoir wet. But when you hit a lull, right, when there hasn't been enough rain and it's getting a little dry and sparse, go back to stuff that you already found and literally work all those clues. In fact, I remember there were times where in the census, I just researched all the neighbors just because I wanted to make sure that there was not somebody that I was forgetting, or the church records, or even someone who sold one thing to another person. And here's the other piece too: you're very limited in your friends, associates, and neighbors research if you're strictly sticking to online records.
Yeah.
That in itself is, now thank God we've had, a lot of stuff open up with, a lot of the stuff being digitized on Family Search. But even then, that's not everything. Family Search doesn't have the manpower and the capability to go and do the whole courthouse. They didn't do that. Some of these things were documented in the 60s and 50s, and some of those records weren't created, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as we always say ad nauseum, go on site, go to the archives, go local, right? You still need to do those things. And some of these clues will lay themselves out. The red carpet we rolled out to you, it'll be like the ancestors are standing there, like in Black Panther on the hill, waiting for you to, have Forrest Whitaker give you the black situation or purple situation so that you could do this research. They've been waiting for you to come to the mountainside with the water. And you've been sitting at your computer. So we're going to go to viewer comments. And of course, we've got to ask Mariah, because there's no way we cannot do an Ask Mariah. It's actually a very good one this evening. All right. From the chat room, we've got Francisco File says, I am learning the F.A.N method as I find people on social media had family in the same places I have family. They seem to move together. Jessica Trotter says, as I realized just how small a community my father's family came from, I had to follow everyone to pull out who belonged to which family line. Karen Harper Royal says, using the people around my family helped me crack both my NPE grandfather cases, meaning non-paternal event. Erlin Sterling says, entire Greenville, Mississippi churches moved to Chicago en masse. Okay, so if you've got Greenville roots, something you may want to consider thinking about is the fact that folks ended up there. And you know what? They also went to Milwaukee too. So don't rule out good old Milwaukee as an option. All right, moving into your favorite part of the show. Ask Mariah. This is the part of the show where you, the viewer, submit your questions, queries, conundrums, and more. And we, the panel, weigh in live with research help specifically geared towards you. Panelists never see the queries beforehand. So you get to see us work out your stuff live and, potentially help you get past your brick wall. So tonight's episode has an Ask Mariah from Taj Cole. Taj says, my second great grandmother was born in 1889 in Scotts Hill, New Hanover County, North Carolina. Hey, Renata. We got a North Carolina person. Her name was Mary Lofton. By death or other unknown reasons, she ended up with her, quote, father, Alfred Lofton. He died, leaving her with his new wife, Nancy, until Nancy died. There is no Lofton family that we are able to locate. The mother's name on Mary Lofton's death certificate is Jane Montague. I've been unable to locate a Black woman named Jane Montague in southeastern North Carolina in the late 1860s on up. So we've got Mary Lofton, born in 1889. Father, in quotes, we don't know if that's her real daddy, named Alfred Lofton. He died, leaving Mary with his new wife, Nancy, until Nancy died. There are no Lofton family that they're able to locate. Uh, on Mary Lofton's death certificate, her name is mentioned or noted as Jane Montague, and Taj has not been able to locate a Black woman named Jane Montague in southeastern North Carolina during the late 1860s on up. Moving forward, she said, however, I did an ancestry DNA test and found a fifth to eighth cousin who was born/lived in the same area. I have located his family up to his grandfather, and after that, no more. I feel like if I can locate his family, I can possibly locate the quote Jane Montague or other members of Alfred Lofton's family. This distant cousin is a descendant of Jasper Lofton. So she's got a fifth to eighth cousin DNA match that is from the area in North Carolina her family's from, that comes from a man named Jasper Lofton. Last slide. Although this would be Mary Lofton's father's family, maybe Jane would be documented somewhere nearby. Since the 1890 census was destroyed by fire, there might be another way to locate Jane. I just haven't figured out, and I thought maybe you all could provide some assistance. Yes, we have the 1900 census, 1910 census, 1880 census, and Mary Lofton's death certificate. Thank you. All right, that's our query for tonight. So what say you, panel?
I would say start looking at the census substitutes for that time in 1890 and around. So you can look in city directories, you can look in tax records, et cetera. And again, many of those things are going to be offline, not online.
Yeah, I would also echo newspapers. We talked about that tonight. Freedmen's Bureau, we haven't looked at that. Now, here's the thing. Mary was born during what we call the black hole. So, this is when you are kind of proven as a researcher when you get an ancestor who was born then, because you got to look for other stuff to supplement the lack of a census. I am still believing in the Holy Spirit that there is a hidden copy of the 1890 census somewhere, and that before we all die, it's going to be released, and there's going to be genealogical parties all over the place when it does happen. Maybe that'll never happen in our lifetime, but I'm just believing this somewhere in somebody's basement. Look, if they could find a box with the first 12 presidents' hair and have that in the Smithsonian, somebody's got an 1890 census somewhere. I just want to put that out there. But newspapers research. Here's the other thing. She has this DNA match. Has she vetted that this is on the right side of the family for her? Now, here's the thing. I know I'm connected to these Trasks, right? But there are several people who could be related to me on two sides of my family that I share DNA with. So, the question is, does she have close relatives tested?
What was Nika about to say again?
She was about to say, there she is.
Okay, because I didn't catch that last.
We lost you, Nika.
Just for a second.
Right when you were saying close relatives.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I was saying that close relatives, make sure you have close relatives tested so that you can rule out that the relation is on one side or another side of the family. Because we don't, yes, it seems perfect. Yes, we've got Loftons. They're in the right location. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're related to that match on the side of the family that has your Loftons. And here's the other thing. If you're from a small location, you could have Loftons on different branches of your family. So that's something to weigh as well. Let's see. Chat room.
I would, maybe she could check the am I on?
Yeah, you're on.
Yes,
Can you hear me? Oh, I was just gonna say maybe she could check the mortality schedule for 1880. Let's see, he was mother was 1860s. She could check the mortality schedules, and also I would encourage her to check the North Carolina Gen Web for New Hanover County and see what kind of information they have on there that might be relevant.
Yes, she's talking US Gen Web, which is a volunteer site where people do transcriptions of actual documents and upload those transcriptions, and you can search those. I don't think enough people use US Gen Web. In fact, I think me and True had a whole conversation about US Gen Web the other day, and we were like,
We did.
"Why?
Yeah,
That was so
North
good."
Carolina counties are great. And also, if she's interested in seeing about possible slavery era time stuff, sorry, that sounded crazy. I would also check Digital Library on American Slavery and see if any of the surnames come up for that county.
And we talked about that Digital Library and American Slavery. I think we had one other episode this year that we talked about slavery. We brought up the Digital Library of American Slavery. So that's a great one. North Carolina State Art. Yeah,
Southern History Collection.
Southern History
Sorry.
Collection. That's okay. And the North Carolina State Archives.
Definitely.
Have you looked there? The other thing I would say, maybe Montague. And here's the thing, right?
Yeah.
Because she was open to the fact that her mother died or something else happened. And has she looked into the records of mental institutions in that state?
That would be Goldsboro, most likely.
Okay, because the reason why I bring that up is maybe her mother was committed. And, and the other piece is, have you looked for Jane Montague there? Have you also looked to see if maybe this Lofton was a second marriage for her mom, and that Montague is not the actual, not her actual maiden name? And here's that thing where we talk about searching the 1880 census for someone who could be around the age of her mother, just named Jane, in that community, and get your viable options and then research them to present. Has she looked at marriage records? Variations. Have you used, wild card searching in those North Carolina records? In fact, North Carolina is the bomb. Like, I would say, next to Louisiana and North Carolina, especially on Ancestry, child, I sat with somebody for 2 hours and was back to fifth grade grandparents on several lines because of the marriages that are online, the death certificates that are online, the census that's online, right? And just North Carolina. And so that, I would say, look for Jane's, born around the approximate time. Mary was born around 1889. You're looking somebody born 1869, maybe a little bit earlier than that. So this is someone who's born during Reconstruction. Ellen brought up that there's a Montague, North Carolina. There's an actual city with that name, or unincorporated community in Pender County called Montague.
Yep.
Look into that. What were you going to say, Tony?
In the 1860 census slave schedule, there's a P. Montague. They're holding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 enslaved people. P. Montague was a slaveholder. If Jane Montague adopted the name of the final slaveholder, and so often people did not. So I don't think that, but if she did, it's possible that that she was enslaved by the Montague family, in which case her name would be different during Reconstruction, or could be.
Another thing is New Hanover is right on the ocean. It's also just one county away from being in South Carolina, from Carolina. So, she could look at water industries to see if, any of those surnames are connected. And she might want to just take a look at South Carolina just because they're very, very close.
That's good.
Anything.
That's good. Geography is key in this. And if you're in a border location, you need to be looking across the state line, because really, in a lot of ways, those locations are just, the county and state lines are arbitrary. For back then, folks could say, well, I'm just going to pick up and leave. And they walk 10 miles north and they're in a different state. So I would definitely weigh that. Any other things we want to suggest to her in terms of I would, she didn't mention siblings for Mary. Has she run down all of those leads? In fact, we have, matter of fact, has she watched our North and South Carolina episode where Tony Carrier was just going off and Renata was just going off giving resources? That was a great episode. Where she just laid out, I mean, literally, it was like a cornucopia. It was Thanksgiving dinner. Tony was like, here. Go back and watch that episode because there's stuff that we're probably not even bringing up right now that was in that one. But she didn't mention siblings of Mary. So does she know that whether or not she has any? Something else is she talked about Nancy, how she ran down Nancy's family to see if she can find Nancy and is there a Jane living next door? Because, you know, some of these men were passed around to several.
And wasn't Wilmington a
women.
slave? Wilmington had a slave port, right?
Yes.
So that's right. That's right there where we're talking about too.
You could look at marriage records, for instance, for what Nika said earlier. If Jane Montague, if Montague wasn't actually her maiden name, you could look at marriage records and see if you see a Jane marrying a Montague. If you look in the index, you could look at the Family Search Wiki for New Hanover County to make sure that you are aware of all of the resources that are available for that county.
And two people in chat actually have Montagues living in North Carolina. They just mentioned
they're in Granville. They're in a different area.
They're in a different area. Okay, she said that she has watched the North Carolina episode and it did help her a lot. She's willing to check her DNA to see if any Montague matches might be hers. And you know what? Look, find that marriage record for Nancy and the dad, and look at what Nancy's maiden name is, because you can't rule out that Nancy was really her mama. I mean, can we? We weren't there. We weren't shining the light when it went down, so we don't know, right? So look for Nancy's family members within your DNA results. That's something that might be a possibility as well. And that's the thing. Also, along the lines of what Renata said about looking in other counties, and looking in South Carolina, directly, I guess that would be South, right? Yeah, South. Looking in South Carolina, also look for that South Carolina county in your DNA results. And see if a bunch of matches start piling up. Also, if you have not tested the oldest person in this particular line, I would suggest testing them, because your DNA is filtered out, right? Think about washing greens. You pick them out the yard. They're going to be dirty. They're going to have bugs. You got to soak them. You got to wash them a few times. Some people use baking soda. Some people use the salt. Some people even put a little dish soap in theirs. I'm not privy to that. I don't do that. But you have to filter it out a few times. And when the DNA gets down to you as a younger person, you may not have enough remnants of her DNA to catch certain people in your results. So test, one of the older family members, or identify within your results somebody who is an older person who would be related through this particular ancestor. Let's see. Yes, Angela says North Carolina marriage records tell you if the parents were alive for both the bride and the groom. So that's something. And then didn't you guys bring up cohabitation records too in North Carolina?
Yes, they're wonderful for North Carolina. Very, very plentiful.
Okay.
And most are online.
Okay. And most of them are online.
And she could check Barnetta McGee White's book, Somebody Knows My Name, if she wants to have them all at her fingertips.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully we gave you enough suggestions, because I won't say all hope is lost in this scenario. I think there's some loose ends. Usually when you have somebody that's this unknown, there's some level of trauma associated with it. That's not always, but where a mother just is never around or something happened like that, there's something sort of monumental that took place. And I don't know. I'm just kind of feeling a little like something happened to her. Maybe her mother died in childbirth, or maybe she was committed to, an institution, or, check that DDD census. or we mentioned the state archives, and I think you said Greensboro is where she would have been if she had been committed, right, Renata?
Goldsboro.
Goldsboro. Okay.
Goldsboro.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
One other thing, I'm not sure about county lines for that area, but I would definitely check to see if the county lines changed during that time period. And if so, she'll want to check all the surrounding counties for their records also.
That's good sound research advice. Absolutely. All right. Well, Taj, hopefully we assisted you this evening, and you have some good leads. And if you're watching, do you have a research brick wall? Would you like help from BlackProGen scaling that wall? Submit your query today for our Ask Mariah segment. The link is in the description of each and every episode of BlackProGen Live. Remember to be specific. Tell us everything you've searched so we don't duplicate efforts if you get selected. And cross your fingers. When you press submit, you just may get chosen for one of our upcoming episodes. All right. And there's a late comment in the chat room from Tyrone Craft that said, yes, the county lines changed. So that may be that. I would say that's probably one of the biggest hurdles that they say, I can't find my people. Well, did you see if the county was created, and not if it was, did the boundary lines change? Huge hurdle. And sometimes people can get through huge brick walls just from that one minor thing. So, all right, moving on to current events. History within history was made. Uh-oh, whose phone is ringing?
Not mine.
History within history was made Saturday, September 1st, when three local women, three generations, were the first African Americans inducted into the Fuqua Court House chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. The chapter's newest members, representing three generations of the Addison family, are Sonia Addison, her daughter Stephanie Addison Mudd, and granddaughter Brooke Addison Moore. In order to become new members, Stephanie, the family genealogist, had to provide documentation linking them back several generations to William Eustace, born 1729, died 1800, of Fuqua County, Virginia. I'm probably saying that wrong. I'm from Louisiana. My family's from Louisiana, so I'm going to go there naturally. A wedding record listing James B. and Louisa E. Eustace provided to be critical piece of information proving the unbroken line from William Eustace to the Addison family. It was found by Stephanie Mudd in records, county records, an American patriot who served in the Revolutionary War. William Eustace was white, was born in Europe, and immigrated to the Virginia colony, first settling in Fuqua. William Eustace's great-grandson, James B. Eustace, married Louisa E. Eustace, a once enslaved African-American woman who lived in Blackwell Town. Their son was Edwin Eustace. Edwin married Annie Washington, and their son Calvin married Manisa. The next generation was their daughter Beatrice Eustace, who married Roger Pitts. The Pitts' daughter was Sonia, one of the new DAR members, who married Victor Addison. Pretty cool. Clap, 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 ladies. Great work. Go ahead, True. What were you going to say?
Nothing, girl. I'm just proud. Yes, 3 generations.
Yes.
And that's fuck here, Nika.
Oh, well, I'm
I
going
don't say
full
fuck
Louis. So
court.
fuck here. My bad. I'm saying fuck because I'm just.
At least that's how I say it.
Those are Shannon's people too. So
okay. Okay.
But we're delighted to have them. Oh, all the things they're gonna be doing. Yay.
Yes, they're going to be doing a lot. All right. At the height of the Black Power movement, the Federal Bureau of Investigation focused on the unlikeliest of public enemies, Black independent bookstores. Did you know this? In the spring of 1968, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who is rumored to have burned the 1890 census, but don't go to tell nobody I said that, announced to his agents that COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program established in 1956 to combat communists, should focus on preventing the rise of, quote, a Black Messiah, end quote, who sought to unify and electrify the militant Black nationalist movement. The program, Hoover insisted, should target figures as ideological diverse as the Black Power activist Stokely Carmichael, later Kwame Ture, Martin Luther King Jr., and Nation of Islam leader Elijah Muhammad. While perhaps not surprising, it is deeply disturbing that Hoover and the FBI would carry out sustained investigations of Black-owned independent bookstores across the country as part of COINTELPRO's larger attacks on the Black Power movement. But Hoover's order that that agents tracked these stores' customers represented not just an attack on Black activists, but also an absolute contempt for America's stated values of freedom of speech and expression. Any citizen who stepped into a Black-owned bookstore, it seemed, risked being investigated by federal law enforcement. Black-owned bookstores also sold works by authors who were not formally associated with Black power organizations, including critically acclaimed writers such as James Baldwin and Lorraine Hansberry, as well as street literature favorites like Iceberg Slim, the author of the novel Pimp. Black bookstores weren't assigned by activist organizations to distribute propaganda. They were independent businesses serving Black people's growing appetite for books by and about Black people. Indeed, the FBI's war against Black bookstores represents a sad chapter in history of law enforcement in the United States, a time when federal agents dispensed with all notions of freedom of speech as they targeted Black entrepreneurs and their customers for buying and selling literature they deemed politically subversive. Now, of course, you're like, wow, this sucks. That's awful. But guess what? That means there are records generated for this. So if you have family that owned a Black bookstore at some point, right? Just send a little freedom of information request over to the FBI and see what they send you over, whether it's redacted or not, about the research that was done into the people. Records were created, right?
Yes.
Something to consider. Here's my kiki of the evening. If you have not seen this, if you have not seen this yet, boy, oh boy, oh boy. Ralph Taylor says it doesn't matter what he looks like. Having lived most of his life as a white man, the 55-year-old now considers himself to be multiracial based on DNA results. The owner of Orion Insurance Group in Linwood, as in Washington, also wants the U.S. Department of Transportation to recognize him as a minority so he can gain more deals providing liability insurance to contractors. Taylor is suing Washington State and the federal government because he was denied a minority business certification under a program created more than 2 decades ago to help level the playing field for minority business owners seeking contracts in the transportation industry. He provided no evidence he has suffered socially or economically because of race. His case is pending with the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. In 2010, Taylor began identifying himself as a multiracial after a DNA ancestry test confirmed he was 90% Caucasian, 6% Indigenous American, and 4% Sub-Saharan African. He applied for state certification with the Washington Office of Minority Business and Women's Business Enterprises, so Orion Insurance Group would be considered a minority business. With no criteria defining a minority race or ethnicity, they eventually approved Taylor, but that same state agency, which also manages the U.S. Department of Transportation certification, decided he was Caucasian under that program's procedures and denied his application. Since then, Taylor has pursued an unconventional legal path that raises questions about how the government determines who is and who isn't a minority. Should it matter what a person looks like? Should they have to prove they suffer discrimination? Can DNA tests prove race or ethnicity? And is Taylor taking advantage of the program by basing his identity on DNA results that some experts consider unreliable? They decide on a case-by-case basis who qualifies for both state and federal programs it manages. And they say, we work really hard to be fair. Nothing is just black and white, she said. This is one of the representatives. It's never just one piece of evidence. What do you all have to say about this?
Nah.
If you don't sit your tail down, as my mama would say. Girl, I about hooted when this just took me out.
Yes.
No, we can't. How do we put this? How do you?
Well, I mean, it's a valid question, you guys.
Still, though. Oh, they're just
we got to justify our still.
Yeah.
Well, there are those of us's who want to use that percentage or less to get on Native American rolls and get scholarship benefits and stuff like that. I've seen that happen, so I don't know. It's kind of the same thing.
And I always ask, does the one drop rule work in reverse?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
heavy topic, but I mean, with the boon in consumer genomics, right?
But you want
This
to
is
be
a
black
question.
when you want to be black, but
Yeah.
we can't take it off. I'm just having a problem with all this.
It's not a costume.
I know,
You
but
can't be selective. Like, you can't say, hey, police officer, look, I'm 25% European. That means that you shouldn't pull me over and
Yeah.
shoot me. Like, you don't get to say that,
nope.
right? It doesn't work that way. Tom is crazy. Tom said, I was going to say Negro, please, but he ain't a Negro. But here's the thing, right?
Wanna
Yeah.
be?
Well, and I think a lot of this is, it rolls into that discussion about um the fine line you walk with cultural appropriation once you get these DNA test results, right? Because you want to experience, you want to learn, you want to do all these things,
Mhm.
but you also have to be mindful that you have not had a lived experience in these groups.
Right.
So you could come off as a gentrifier. Like,
Mhm.
yes, let me go ahead and coin that term. Do not be a genetic gentrifier.
There it is. We got a new one.
We got a new one. Don't come in
I
and
had an issue just the other day filling out a form at a doctor's office, and they, now that I know all this European is in me, every time they say check all that apply, I sit there and I think about it, but I just can't, because that's not who I am, So I still only check African American, but I really do sit there and think about it now. Am I being honest now that I know that I'm almost, what I think, I can't even remember, 37%, I think, European. Am I being honest when it says check all that apply? And I don't, so it is
And that's
something to
but the
think
thing
about.
is, we can't. I think some of this has to do with the parents, right? You can hide from being 37%, right? But it also works in the reverse. If somebody was 37% sub-Saharan African, right? Do you only utilize that when it benefits you?
Right.
Like, to me, if I was on this commission who had to do the certification, I would want a demonstrated proof that you were walking in this 4%.
Right.
Right.
What have you done and
Right.
contributed to the community that says that you have been walking in this 4%
Mhm.
outside of,
Yeah.
well, I got this DNA test result? Because, oh, that's the part of the story I didn't read to you guys. That was at the bottom. Somebody else already got in doing this mess.
Wow.
Yet some who have qualified for the program acknowledge they have never been disenfranchised. Because I guess that must be one of the criteria. A Yakima man who qualified for both the state and federal program said he is about 6% African American, looks Caucasian, and has never encountered discrimination. Since 2014, the program has helped him win millions of dollars of contracts.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I bet you $10 that the man that filed this case referred to this guy
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
as his friend who told him
Right.
he could do this,
Yeah.
and he's gonna use him as a litmus test. And the guy did not want to be named, which is still telling that he didn't want his name listed in the story,
But
because otherwise they would have said who he was.
Well, Nika, you made a point earlier about him not having lived the experience of being of African descent, and that's the reason he needs to take a seat. He needs to take
Yeah.
a seat because he has not lived that experience, and he's just looking at a genetic profile. That's just no, that's not going to do it.
I'm kind of amazed because when I was up in Washington State teaching, and I had to deal with kids from Eastern Washington, they didn't want to unpack whiteness. They did not want to go there. They would get so mad. It was amazing. And even here, we're left unpacking all of the, the people of color stuff, but we're still not they're still not discussing the implications of the institutional benefits that he's gotten as a white man. All of a sudden, he just wants wants the advantages,
Right.
And does it, like I said, does it work in reverse?
Yeah.
What do I get for my 25%?
Right.
Are we gonna start making badges that you could put on your phone, or I could put on my driver's license, like the donor thing that says, hey, she's got a few great grandfathers that are white? Like, do we get that, or is that's off because of the one drop rule? It doesn't work in reverse.
I just don't think I'm going to see it in my lifetime. I'm just a black lady walking around. They don't care that, my mama is white.
Mm-hmm.
They're not seeing her. And
Mm.
even when I am with my mom, they don't even think that's my mother. They just like, who is that?
Right.
My mama.
Mm.
So yeah, this is it. Got a lot of emotions in it, and it's hard to separate the
Mm-hmm.
what you're asking from the emotion. But
Well, I think this is an evolving conversation,
it
but I think,
is.
but this is one of those, this is one of those outliers. This is, when you go to the Dollar Tree and you buy that broom and you know darn well that broom is not going to last. And you hold on for dear life because you just want it to last and do what it's going to do, and you get mad every time you sweep because it doesn't get everything up you want, when you know you should have went to Walmart or Target and got a better broom, but you stopped at the Dollar Tree and got your broom. Th- I hate comparing it to a broom, but you know, this is one
Yeah.
of those fallouts, right? Yes, these tests are serving a purpose. Yes, they've been amazing. We've talked about this ad nauseum tonight with
Mm-hmm.
Ask
Mhm.
Mariah and with breadcrumbs and friends, associates, and neighbors. But this is one of the fallouts,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And to me, if the writers, that's the thing. This is where we as researchers have to educate journalists. If you're writing this story, yes, the main overarching theme is that this white appearing man, is sued the state of Washington, the federal government, because they won't recognize him as a minority. You're also going to delve into the other piece.
Mm-hmm.
Do minorities who have a sizable amount of European DNA, how can they benefit?
Mm.
Right.
And we're
So
going to face this again for the
Mm-hmm.
census. Remember,
Yeah.
we had that discussion about that.
mhm.
So, yeah, it's like you said, it's an evolving.
Yes, and Shannon wants to be make makes wants to make it clear that he did not test with ancestry DNA. He tested with ancestry by DNA, which is, that's not even one of the big three. I don't even know what they do.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, interesting. All right, moving forward. All
I
right,
forgot where we're
so
at. Girl, y'all threw me off with that one.
all right. Historically, Black colleges and universities have been the bedrock of the African American community since their inception. For that reason alone, they are genealogical gold mines. In the next episode of BlackProGen, we'll talk about how to uncover connections to these institutions, how to research your family members who attended them, and more. Join us next Tuesday, October 2nd, for historical Black colleges, schools, and universities. All right. Did you know we only have 6 shows left for 2018? Yeah, you guys, it's only 6 shows left. Don't miss a single one. Head to whoisnikasmith.com for a downloadable schedule. And don't forget to set your reminders. Don't forget to tune in to the long running Research at the National Archives and Beyond, hosted by our genealogy buddy and Black ProGen Live panelist, also known as one of the aunties, Bernice Bennett. This Thursday, she'll be talking with Ada Adanago Brown from Roots to Glory Tours about their recent trip to Cote d'Ivoire. Also, check out the African Roots podcast hosted by Black ProGen Life panelist, aka one of the other aunties, Angela Walton Raji. She has been rolling and going, doing her little features on her Indian Territory folks. So please be sure to check that out as well. Here's your reminder also to join the conversation now. The chat room has been flying by this evening. You can participate in the live chat on YouTube at the top right of the screen if you're watching on a computer. You can also catch the live replay if you're watching this as a recording. And all the comments that are populating at a particular point in time in the broadcast they'll show up on the screen as well at that point. Also, you can talk to us anytime you want. Weigh in on Twitter by tweeting us at BlackProGen or use the hashtag BlackProGen. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my buddy, True Lewis, to close us on out.
Thank you, Nika. She always puts a good program on for us and my panelists. I just want to thank you all, Tony, Renata, Ellen and Willie. You guys are just, oh, thank you. And everybody out there in the chat room, whether you're new or you're just joining us from anywhere, or if you've just been with us for the whole 3 years, we just appreciate you all coming out and making this the most for us and for you. And we just truly do this from our heart for you all. So we just want to thank you, and we'll see you next on October the 2nd for the HBCU episode. And thank you and good night.
BlackProGen Live. BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen.
Hello, everybody out there.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen
Live.
The unapologetic Black and people of color viewpoint. The place where evidence tells the stories.